Hello, everyone. So my project is mapping our stories, community health impacts of neighborhood oil drilling. My name is Maizah, and I worked with my mentor, Professor Maggie Phillips, on this project. So here's a little broad overview of my project. So title and topic, mapping our stories, community health impacts of neighborhood oil drilling. So some of the things that I was thinking about when I was creating this project is how might we document the experiences of those residing near neighborhood oil wells, and through this help reinforce community power through democratizing technology. So kind of looking at these dynamics between community, technology, and storytelling. And my project is quite multifaceted, I would say. So my process and methodology had a lot of different components. Started off with conducting several informational interviews with leaders of community organizations, as well as professors who were very involved in doing this type of work. Then I conducted semi-structured interviews with actual community members who were experiencing the health effects of oil wells. And then finally use these insights to build an interactive mapping tool to showcase these community health narratives. And in terms of results, since this isn't like a typical research project, my results are kind of a little bit different. So identifying and solidifying community connections was a big part of it. Making these connections with people, I think, was the most significant aspect of my project, and then conducting and drawing meaningful insights from the interviews that I conducted, and finally using these to prototype this interactive mapping tool of personal stories. So a little bit of background, just very briefly. So Los Angeles is home to the largest urban oil field in the United States, and there are thousands of oil wells dispersed throughout the city. And oil wells have very well documented negative impacts on people's health, and this could include symptoms such as headaches, asthma, nosebleeds, general respiratory issues, and even cancer. The people that I talked to talked about all of these different issues. And these health effects have been really well documented, but in terms of more personal narratives coming from people on the ground experiencing these health effects, these are not as well documented and are definitely not easily accessible in terms of like, if someone just wanted to read about other people's experiences with this, you would have a lot of difficulty doing that. And to add to these dynamics, the issue of oil drilling is very much related to a lot of intersectional issues of environmental justice. So oil wells in or near low-income neighborhoods typically have fewer regulations than those that are close to higher-income neighborhoods. And this could include things like these oil wells are typically uncapped, they're typically much closer to people's homes. So basically those who are most at risk typically also lack political power, such as in the financial sense, or even linguistically. So this map is really to highlight these most marginalized voices, and that kind of came through through the people that I decided to interview through this project, which I'll talk about later on. So another high-level look at what my project is about. So by working in coalition with community organizations such as Stand LA, which is a big one, coalition org that does a lot of work related to neighborhood oil drilling and its health effects, I hope to create an interactive mapping tool that showcases the personal health narratives of underrepresented people impacted by neighborhood oil drilling. So a big component of my project was community engaged research. Like everything that I was doing, I really wanted my work to be actually usable by the community that I was working with. I wanted it to be rooted in like actual issues that are happening in Los Angeles. So a really big aspect was making sure that I was connecting with these community organizations and holding myself accountable by actually speaking to people impacted by these issues. So more theoretically, I was informed by critical cartography, so kind of looking at maps politically and as tools of power, and then also drew a lot from community archiving. I would say my project is really like creating a big community archive of people's personal narratives with the health effects of oil drilling. And then finally, storytelling is obviously a big part of this, and storytelling is also really, really significant in terms of like advocacy, like you need storytelling in order to get people to care about your issues. And when I was speaking to some of the community organizations about this, they really emphasize the storytelling aspect. Like they're constantly like taking like people who are part of governments and who are making laws, like they take them through these like toxic tours is what they call them. So they take them through these communities and have them talk to people who are most affected. So this is kind of my way of kind of using technology to democratize that and make those stories more accessible. So kind of just a rough timeline of what I have been doing. Started off with doing a lot of background research on oil drilling in LA, and that kind of led me to reach out to a number of different community organizations who are doing related work. There's a lot of work going on related to the health effects of oil drilling, and this is also a very intersectional issue, so these community orgs oftentimes also do work related to like housing, stuff like that. So my next step was doing this conducting this outreach and conducting informational interviews with different organizations and intellectuals. And through this, I was able to solidify a community partner, and I think this was a very important part of my project. So I ended up connecting with Ruth Andrade from Scope. That's another local community org, and she is a community leader who has personally had a lot of experiences personally living near oil wells and having like the health results of living near these oil wells, and she was able to connect me with a lot of different community members who were willing to share their stories with me. And also just to note that Ruth is a Spanish speaker, so that was a big barrier for me personally because I don't speak Spanish. So she kind of led me to a lot of different people who primarily also spoke Spanish. So kind of the population that I was speaking with is linguistically isolated, primarily Latinx, primarily come from lower income backgrounds. So there are all of these different backgrounds that are attached to the people that I was interviewing for this project. So basically my project was kind of a sample of interviews, creating a process for community organizations to later build upon if they want to conduct more interviews throughout LA to look at other people who are experiencing the health effects of oil drilling. So I'll kind of go into those interviews a bit more. So I ended up interviewing 5 different community leaders involved in activist work. These were semi-structured interviews, and the goal was really to get people to share their stories. I conducted interviews in both English and Spanish, so that involved like having a translator and doing simultaneous translation, which was kind of interesting to get through. And the length of these interviews was around 30 to 50 minutes each. So some broad themes kind of surfaced from my interviews. A lot of people emphasized fears for family health, and a lot of the people that I spoke to were also mothers, and they spoke about watching their children get sick from living near these oil drilling sites. So this person that I talked to said that someone in her community said there was this time when the odor was so strong and that her son wouldn't stop bleeding from the nose. Just being a mother, I'm very concerned about my children's well-being. There's also a lot of lack of awareness and education around the issue of oil drilling. Drilling sites are usually purposely very well hidden, like they make the surrounding areas all nice, they hide it behind walls. So a lot of residents aren't even aware that they're living near these sites, and even more are not totally informed of like the health consequences of that. And in addition to that, a lot of people described having limited access to health care. Oftentimes, this individual talked about their immigration status being a barrier to that. And also, people spoke about like what they wanted for the future. They wanted to build safer, healthier community spaces, safe spaces for children to play, places for community to collectively make decisions about the neighborhood, community gardens. So talked a lot about hope for the future. And I guess I just wanted to quickly highlight that I also asked people to talk about like what do they want policymakers and government to do. And this individual that I spoke to is, she actually is getting her master's from UCLA, and she was telling me about how she wishes like the people who make the laws, the people that are in charge of people's lives, could see our world in their eyes and realize how much of a need it is in the community. So I won't read all of it, but she ends with, I think it's going to take the rest of the people in this country to make a change. So it was very interesting to see how my interviews kind of took people from talking about their very personal stories with oil drilling to more of like what they think needs to happen in order for change to be made. And this is kind of what my mapping site currently looks like. It's definitely not done, but basically the idea is that you can click on a zip code and then that will populate this sidebar with like an interview highlight, transcript of the interview, and then the audio. So definitely still a work in progress, but that's kind of the idea, and I wanted it to be totally anonymized for the sake of people's privacy. Okay, so some very quick challenges and takeaways and also kind of advice for the future cohort. Narrowing the project scope was, as everyone else has been saying, a really big part of this project. I started off being very, very ambitious, and I think my project is still quite ambitious. So I feel like that just kind of happens as you keep talking to people about your project and kind of keep doing your work and realizing your own limitations. In my case, doing community engaged work and doing it properly was a really difficult thing to do because all of the different people that I talked to had different ideas of what was the most important issue in their community, what they wanted me to do. So kind of had to make those compromises between having my work being usable and practical while also doing something that I wanted to do. Communication, I talked about language barriers and logistics and finances, like conducting those interviews, coordinating working adults. That was very difficult. Community orgs are very overextended, and I, as a student, am also overextended. And there were also a lot of uncontrollable factors like LA weather forcing me to move interviews and distressing campus and global events that made it very difficult for me to focus on my work. So a lot of things to think about, and a lot of things to think about as like a researcher conducting this work as a student who is also living in the world that we live in. And next steps are to finish up my website, which is structured for easy handoff. And I'm hoping to compile my procedures and research process for Stand LA/Scope to continue the work however they see fit. So I'm hoping to pitch my proof of concept to Stand LA. And as I mentioned, the goal is really to develop this process. So the interviews that I conducted, the people that I talked to, the structure that I created, I'm hoping to share that with community organizations to help them have more consistency in terms of the information that they collect. So what my project is really like the building blocks to a more accessible community archive that showcases the stories of the most underrepresented. So a lot of people to acknowledge, and then I also put together a reading list or bibliography if you have any more questions about the concepts that I brought up. Thank you.
You said you interviewed activists. Might there be bias because the activists are advocating on behalf of a particular point of view, and give me thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think the purpose of my project is really to emphasize that bias. Like the purpose is really to showcase the actual lived experiences of people on the ground rather than to make any like objective claims about environmental justice or how oil drilling works in LA. So I think in my case, like the fact that they were all community leaders just made my project interesting in a way, since these people had like a lot of experiences seeing these health effects for themselves and working with a lot of people and community organizations who kind of did that sort of work. So I would say like bias is a good thing in my particular case. Yes?
So is your map showing the areas where there's the biggest problem in terms of oil?
The map is kind of just a way to organize the different interviews that I have collected and that hopefully community organizations will later collect. I'm still in the process of figuring out the best way to display the information, but as it currently is kind of shaded based off of like which areas the most interviews have been collected. But I would say it's not necessarily like these are the areas where the problem is most significant. It's kind of just like which areas are people willing to be interviewed, and which areas do community orgs have access to people who are willing to be interviewed.
Follow-up, is there a map where we can see which parts of LA are most dangerous?
Yeah, there are a lot of maps out there that are showcasing like the active and inactive, capped and uncapped oil wells throughout LA. I'm hoping to incorporate some of that information into my map to have it like a separate layer. But yeah, that information is out there.
Thank you.
Yes.
What did you use to create the
Yeah, so I have been coding that on GitHub with like vanilla HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So yeah, and I also use Leaflet. So everything that I've been using, I've intentionally been trying to go for open source to make it the most accessible so that I can like really hand it off to community orgs without telling them, oh, you have to pay like a subscription to access this. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing.